Joining us now for analysis on the 2020 race and the moves by the Biden team so far is Emma Meshell Phillips, a spokesperson for Young Americans for Liberty. So, Emma, I just want to get your reactions right off the bat. I haven't talked to you since the presidential election. We've, of course, talked to the lead up to it. But from what you saw on November 3rd up to this day, what's your response?
Well, my first response would be, I think we need a better system for counting votes. We need a system that's more efficient, that gives voters better peace of mind that their ballots are being counted properly. Regardless of where you fall on the voter fraud debate, I think this is proof that Americans have distrust in the government's ability to effectively count these things. And I think it's a good argument against big government that we can barely even count the votes in a properly timely fashion for the government to decide who's going to run it. And that's one of the most important things they do. So I think it's a big argument against big government. But when you look at the way these races have shaken out across the country, it is a sounding rebuke against big government tyranny. And yes, it's looking like Biden may take this by a slim margin. But when you look at state races across the country, which is what we're involved in as an organization, there are a lot of strong rebukes against these big government controls. People are voting in large numbers for small government, freedom-loving candidates.
And whether or not Joe Biden, for example, does win by a small margin, or whether the Trump campaign is successful in these court lawsuits that they're preparing, I think that one thing was abundantly clear, and that's that there was no rejection of Trumpism. That is something that I've heard Democrats say a lot over the past couple of weeks, saying that, you know, they are going to sweep the Senate, they're going to really build on their control in the lower chamber, but that's not necessarily the case. I mean, in fact, we're looking at a time right now where Republicans look like they might hold on to Senate control, and they've been chipping away at that majority in the lower chamber as well. So when we look at the conservative electorate, what did we learn about them?
Well, we learned that they don't want an insider candidate. And if what the left was saying was so true, that everyone was going to reject Trump, even the Republicans, it would have been a much clearer set of results for Biden. And that's just not the case. The fact that it's come down to the wire like this shows that people still on both sides do not want an insider swamp monster running the country. And that's what they see Joe Biden as. And again, when you look at the state races and the kind of candidates that were successful, we gained a lot of ground in the House. That's an exciting thing to see. It shows that people do not want these far left socialist AOC type figures running the country. And we saw it in the House. We're watching it happen in the Senate right now. It's such a tight race. And we certainly saw it on the state level. We elected 117 Young Americans for Liberty endorsed candidates that believe in limited government and freedom rather than shutting down the economy and having big government controls.
And I'm so glad you brought up the state level, because that's something that doesn't necessarily get the media attention that it deserves. But that's quite literally where most change happens in the average American's life. I mean, that is something that it's more local to the individual, and it's something where the decisions are more direct to that individual as well. But when we talk about the Democratic Party, we're seeing some infighting early on. We see that progressives, for example, are saying issues like Medicare for all were winning issues among their type of candidates, whereas the moderates are saying that's not true. Things like defund the police, words like socialism really hurt Democrats this election cycle. So when we talk about the Democratic electorate, is it as divided as these congressional lawmakers are making it seem, or did they show up for Joe Biden and that's really all you can say about it?
Well, I think it's interesting when you think of the issues that affect Americans as American issues rather than Republican or Democrat issues. There's a new report out from the Wall Street Journal today that went into detail on the Rio Grande Valley and how voters, largely Latino voters there, almost didn't even fully vote for Biden. Biden won by a very, very slim margin there. And they actually interviewed a lot of these voters and spoke with them about why they supported Donald Trump. And the number one issue that was brought up was the economy. These people are worried that their oil jobs are going to become illegal as soon as Biden takes office. And they're worried about not being able to run their small businesses. And what that tells us is an open and free economy that values the individual's autonomy to earn their own living is not a left versus right issue. That is a fundamentally American issue. And it's one that voters care about across the political spectrum, even so to the point where Latino voters who maybe haven't historically favored Trump would be willing to give him a try.
And it's not just in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, but it's also Miami-Dade, Florida. It's also certain parts of Arizona. We're even seeing that the numbers in the more metro or suburban areas outside of major cities, there was that shift as well among Latino voters. So I think that there is a sort of realignment taking place. I'm not smart enough to figure it out myself or have the hindsight necessarily to make the determination just yet. But what do you think is the future of the conservative movement?
The future of the conservative movement is socially tolerant. It is fiscally responsible, and it's not a big government that wants to run everyone's lives on an individual level. That's something that both parties tend to skew towards when they're in control. And I expect to see a return of the Republican deficit hawk if we have a Democrat take office again in January. And I think that it's important that we call these Republicans and Democrats responsible for the fiscal sanity of our country. And that's where I think the future of the Republican Party is. It's in standing up against lockdowns, standing up against shutting down small businesses, standing up against mandates that require people to all follow a blanket solution when it comes to their personal health. That is not a winning message. And if the Republican Party fails to grasp that and really run with those principles of liberty, they will not be successful. But I have hope that they're going to do that given the lessons that we've learned in this last year.
And I think we've already seen Senate Republicans prepare to make that shift a little bit. Their refusal to give into the $1.8 trillion price tag that Speaker Nancy Pelosi wanted in her coronavirus relief package. We saw Republicans give into that early on in the pandemic, but towards the end, we saw them saying, you know what, we can't do that anymore. I feel like that's the beginning of the pivot, just in case there was going to be a Biden administration. So I think that you're exactly right for saying that. But Meshell Phillips, it's always a pleasure having you on this program. Thanks for coming on tonight.
Thanks, Alex.